Welcome everyone, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. As an Adobe partner, we're happy to say this is our first joint webinar with Adobe. We're super excited. We're gonna be going into the Adobe Experience Platform Web Sdk and XDM deep dive here. My name is Amy Anderson. I'm our marketing coordinator at Softcrylic. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, make sure to put them in the Q&A or the chat, as well as make sure you take a chance to look at the poll that we have launched. We'd love to see your feedback there. And if you have any further questions about our Adobe services or that we offer or any of our other Softcrylic services, reach out to us, events@softcrylic.com. With that, I will pass things off to Jeff and we'll get started.
Hey, thanks, Amy. Welcome to the webinar, the XDM Deep Dive. Very fortunate to have Rudi here. Thank you so much for joining us. He's a legend in the Adobe space. And then we have Andy as well, who we both were in the Web Sdk beta program and early access program with Adobe. So before we get started, please fill out the poll whenever you log in. It helps us kind of gauge what the audience is looking for in this webinar. And the most important, to keep this engaging, we like a lot of questions. So the first 3 people who ask a question over Zoom will receive our very popular Best Friends for EVAR t-shirt, and Sammy will kind of coordinate that after this meeting. So with that, let's dive into this. Rudi, I think a couple months ago, or probably a month ago, Andy and I gave kind of an overview of the Web Sdk. And for people in the audience who were not part of it, I just kind of want to go over, can you give a high level overview of what the Web Sdk actually is? And I know we have some slides we're going to share, but I'll kick it over to you now.
Sure. So the Adobe Experience Platform Web Sdk is the future of data collection for Adobe. So what we've done is we have centralized and combined all of the different various JavaScript libraries from all of the Experience Cloud solutions. So instead of having to have one library for Adobe Analytics and one library for Target and one library for Audience Manager and one library for the platform, there is a single unified data collection SDK. And so that way, not only does it greatly reduce the page weight, the amount of JavaScript on your site, but it also reduces the amount of conflicts between the different code versions. So if you've done any sort of implementation in the last several years and you've worked with the ECID service and you've tried to keep your analytics code in the right version with your target code so that the ECID would sync across, you know that can be challenging. So now that all of that is combined, it's a much easier process for folks to send that single call from Adobe straight into the Adobe Edge. And so, and we've got some slides here to kind of talk about how we got there. And I think if we start to go through those, it'll make a lot more sense. And so the unified data collection is not something that we just came up with recently. This is a vision we've been working towards for many years now. And you started to see it when we first came out with a DTM after the satellite acquisition, that we always viewed data collection as very much an experience event-driven item. First, we wanted to identify the events. What did the user do? We wanted to help organize and structure that data, what information describes what the user just did. And then finally, the tag or the endpoints, what needs the data? And so if we go to the next slide, it looks like this. So there was an interaction, something happened that you wanted to track. You collect all that data once and with one rule or one call to notify as many tools and tags and technologies that event just happened at one time. And so DTM got us, a lot of the way down the path there. Go to the next one. But it suffered from what all the legacy tag management systems suffer from, and DTM included, is that you would have the tag management JavaScript library, and then when you added in the different solution libraries, there was no efficiencies of the code. You were just combining all the JavaScript into a single system. So it was efficient from a management perspective, but from code weight on the page, it didn't actually save you anything. You'd have all of the Adobe Analytics code, all of the Target code, all the other third-party vendors as well, including the tag manager itself. And so when we moved to launch, we took a huge step forward. So launch, we completely rewrote launch from the ground up. and it had a very modular framework. So we discovered or realized when we built the Adobe launch code that it contained like 80% of the same type of event tracking code that was already in Adobe Analytics. So when you have launch on the page and you added in the Adobe Analytics extension, you didn't add in the entire library. You added in the missing pieces. And we use that same approach for all of our solutions. And we strongly encouraged all the folks that were writing extensions to take that same approach. So a very simple example, almost every tracking code out there wants to grab a value out of the query string. And almost every tracking code out there has a function that's grabbing a value out of the query string. And we said, let's not have a dozen or 2 dozen of those exact same type of JavaScript function running. Here's ours. Leverage this function, use it across your entire implementation. So this launch was a huge first step to consolidate that, but you still had individual modules that you had to deal with and the possibility for some conflicts. And that we still had kind of a distributed data collection setup. So if we go to the next slide, so you would still have the bits and pieces of, on the left side here, of the tracking libraries, but then each of those tracking libraries would send that data to a different endpoint. Now, sure, all of the Adobe tech would send it to Adobe servers, but there'd be a different endpoint for the analytics data and a different endpoint for the target data. And we would do all the visitor ID syncing and matching on the backside, but there were still different calls. And anybody that's done any kind of implementation, if you've opened up the debugger, you've seen the analytics call and the target call and the audience manager call, and you've seen those separate calls in the debugger. So that's why what the SDK allows us to do is to really move to true unified data collection. And so by the unified data collection, what we've got here on the left side of the screen is the Adobe Web Sdk, Experience Platform Web Sdk. In all of the Adobe tracking, analytics, target, audience manager, if you're a platform customer, that's in there too, is all combined. And by using the XDM, which is our experience data model, you send the data over to the Adobe Edge Network. And from there, we can syndicate that data out to wherever you've set up in the Edge configuration. As you can see here on the slide, we've got a little bit of a preview of things to come. The mobile SDK and the server-to-server API are in beta and being worked on so that we can have true device-side data collection handled. And there in the center, coming out later this year, early next year, our plan is to be able to have server-side forwarding in launch, where you can syndicate that same data from that single call to Adobe, to the Adobe Edge, and send it out to as many non-Adobe third-party destinations as possible. So what we've done is we've truly unified the data collection, and we've done it primarily, or initially what's been released is the for the Adobe stack, but we're opening up, like I said, later this year, early next, to be able to syndicate that data out to any third-party destination as well. And so the SDK is simply the code mechanism that we put either inside of launch. You can leverage the SDK if you're not a launch customer as well. You don't have to use launch, but that way it can unify all your data collection.
Okay, thanks, Rudi. I think that's super helpful to kind of set the stage with our audience here of kind of how Adobe has evolved and what's in turn become, the Web SDK over the years. So thank you for taking us through that. I think the biggest question, do you need to be an AEP platform customer to take advantage of the Web SDK?
Yeah, you do not. So you do have to get provisioned for access to part of the platform UI. And that's because in order to leverage the SDK, you have to send data over in the XDM format, or Experience Data Model format. And the interface that you create and manage those schemas, that XDM schema, lives inside of the platform interface. So I know there's been some confusion about that. You do have to get provisioned for that limited set of access if you're not a platform customer. But any Adobe customer is able to leverage the Web SDK. You just have to reach out to your account team, and you'll send them your Adobe org ID, and they can help you find that if you're not familiar with what that is. and they will provision you with access. And it could take, a week or so to get that set up, but then you'll be able to actually go log in to a limited part of the platform to be able to create and edit and manage those schemas. And in the demo that I'm going to do a little bit later, you'll see what part of that interface you'll be working with.
Okay, that's helpful. So really reach out to your account managers or customer support to really get access to that, the AEP portion of Adobe. So yeah, that makes sense. And I think the next one, a big one, is really, are there any cost implications? Let's say you're already an analytics user, any cost considerations with using the Web SDK?
No, there is no incremental cost for using the SDK to consolidate your data collection and to send that data directly over to the edge network and then the solutions that you're already under license for. If down the line you want to look at platform, there's cost conversation around platform you should have with your Adobe account team. But just the mechanism of changing the way you collect data and make it more efficient, there's no incremental cost for that.
Okay, gotcha. All right, so I kind of want to move on. I hope that gives everyone, good high-level overview of the Web SDK. Where I want to focus next is really the Experience Data Model, or XDM. From our last webinar, we got a lot of questions of what XDM is, how I configure it and so forth. So I think for the high level, XDM is a schema, but it is built on classes plus mixins. So my question over to you, Rudi, can you kind of go over what a class and a mixin is within the AEP platform?
Sure. So we understand that creating the schema and dealing with that is a departure from what folks who have been doing implementations for years and years now. It's a big departure from what they're used to. So a schema just basically allows you to teach Adobe what you're going to send to us, and it helps you define the name value pairs of the type of data you're sending. So for years we forced people to use props and evars, and you guys even made great shirts about the best friends for evar. But while the props and evars aren't going away inside of analytics, you don't need to concern yourself on the implementation side. So what we're trying to do is make it so that you can construct your implementation as something that feels natural and logical. So sending over name value pairs that make sense. The XDM model, what it does is it allows you to say, okay, here are the name value pairs that are going to be coming in, and then you can configure and tell Adobe what it needs to do with those name value pairs. In analytics, we're going to take these name value pairs and we're going to push them into these props and evars. Or we're going to push the data over to target, or we're going to have a bidirectional data flow with analytics and target. And so the XDM and schemas, the schemas, the mixins, and the classes allow you to customize that schema for your specific needs. Every single business has a different set of tracking needs, and they have a different language that they use. So what their acronyms and the name value pairs that they might want to use are very different from the very next customer, even if they're in the exact same vertical. So the mixins and the classes allow you to, there are some that we've pre-built that are great that have, really good e-commerce name value pairs already set up, search name value pairs already set up, other product view and things like that allow you to quickly construct a schema. You can build out your own custom mixin or class. So if you've got something very specific that you want to do, you can build it and save it so that you can reuse it across multiple sites. But basically, you can think about the mixins and the classes as kind of modular pieces for helping you to quickly build out your schema. Over time, I anticipate that those schemas will be, or those mixins might be tied to maybe a new feature inside of our reporting engines. So I think long ago, like when the marketing channels report first came out long ago, and you had to move over to it was a certain version of the S code or to app measurement to be able to leverage that. And so this thing, you can think of mixins, there may be something new, some new tracking that we're doing that you might be able to just, okay, this is already pre-configured. I can slide that into place and have it work. But it's designed in such a way so that you can customize it and reuse it however you need to.
Okay, gotcha. I think that's really helpful, kind of explaining the reusable piece of the mixin, especially around like the e-commerce variables that you were talking about. I think that's going to be critical for a lot of sites. So the way I'm thinking about this though is these mixins will have to map to either a client-side data layer or server-side data layer. So in my mind, is there something that kind of helps with the mapping of your mixins and class map to, let's say, a WC3 standard data layer?
So there's not a mixin specifically for the W3C data layer yet. That is certainly something that could be built either by the community or potentially Adobe in the future. One of the things that's on our roadmap is kind of a data mapper to a bring your own data layer type of approach. So right now, the current state is on the device side, where you're actually running on the client's web browser on their phone. You do have to put the data into the XDM format there before you send it to the edge. And then at the Adobe Edge network is where you're able to syndicate that data off to different endpoints. What the data mapper would do is say, send us the data the way that in your data layer format, just push us at your data layer, and then to be able to map it on the edge so that mapping exercise would happen there. So it'll help with implementations. It'll help kind of keep things streamlined, maybe make it a little easier. So if you are using the W3C data layer or any other format, it should make that part of the implementation smoother. I don't have a date for that one yet that I can share, but that is, we're constantly trying to make it easier to leverage our products and our solutions. And so this is one of the items that actually came out of our beta programs is, the feedback that we've gotten to try and offer something like this. So that is definitely something that's in the pipeline being worked on.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I think that would be super, helpful, when you're trying to instrument this, having that mapper tool on the edge side of the house. I think it would just make, from a development standpoint, implementation standpoint, it'll make things really easy. So, before we get into more questions, I think this is a really good point to show a demo. So Rudi has offered to give a end-to-end kind of demo of what the Web SDK will look like. So with that, I'll let you take it over, Rudi.
All right. Just make sure you can see the lovely Luma website up on the screen right now. Fantastic.
Yep.
So I'm going to go through the demo, hopefully kind of in the order in which you would need to set up or think about working with the XDM. And so once you get provisioned, once you've reached out to your account team and they've set you up with the proper access, you'll actually get provisioned to a small portion of the Experience Platform. And this is the Adobe Experience Platform interface. And the part that you'll get access to is right down here under Data Management, the schemas. And I've already created a schema here, this Luma schema. But to go in and create a new schema, it's really quite simple. You just go in and say, I'm going to either create an individual profile schema or an experience event. The profile schema doesn't really apply unless you're working with a platform a little more. But right now we're going to be doing just the experience event schema. And what this looks like, if we go in and take a look at it, the one that I've already set up, this just gives you a nice visual representation of what that JSON name value structure needs to be. You're basically defining, you're saying, hey, Adobe, I'm giving you the exact structure and the name value pairs of what I'm going to be sending you. And then within each solution, you can map out how you're going to be leveraging that. So you can see, like right here, I was able to add in mix-ins that had events about the web browsers. There were certain privacy ones, e-commerce events, identity mapping. And if we go and take a look at the different mix-ins that are available, there's a ton in here that we've already pre-built for customers. So there's ones that are specific to experience event target with user IDs and channel details and membership details, direct marketing, media. So there is a lot to go through here as far as the wide variety of different types of mix-ins you can use to customize the type of data that you're going to send to us. And if you actually open this up, you can actually see that you can actually customize and put in very specific, unique items. You can go in and add your own name value pairs here to anything that you want to send to us. And once you've built this and saved this schema, once you log into launch, this exact same view will be presented to you via the Web SDK extension to make it very easy for you to map data points over to. So the first step is you go in, you get access, you create the schema. You don't have to worry about getting it 100% correct to start with. You can always come back and update the schema. Always go back into launch and work with new fields. So if you only put in 2 or 3 things to start with, and then a month later you realize you need a bunch more, that's fine. You can always go and update the schema and then just go update launch to your implementation to reflect that. So after we've set up the schema, we'll actually go into Adobe Launch. And I've already in my Luma website here. First thing we want to do is actually add the Adobe Web Sdk extension. And what we'll do, I'm going to hit the configure here. And this just has, this will have your Adobe org ID shown. It'll also allow you to specify which edge configuration you're using. And this is the most important piece. If you remember that slide that we showed that had the nice triangle, kind of the Illuminati slide, and the dead center was that edge network configuration. So this is the part here. If we look at the edge configuration, this is where you say, okay, I'm sending data from the device side to the Adobe Edge. And when it matches up with the right environment ID and we validate that it's the right, that we're getting data from the source that we're expecting it from, this is where you say, okay, I want to send data to the platform. If I'm a platform customer, I'm interacting with Target. I've turned on Audience Manager and I've turned on Adobe Analytics. And in the future launch server side, you can see that it's not enabled here yet. But you can see that this is where you'll turn that on as well. You won't add the analytics extensions and the target extensions anymore. You'll simply flip this switch and it'll start sending data directly to those solutions. Yes, there's some mapping you'll need to do with pushing stuff via processing rules into the right props and evars, but the actual code on the page to turn analytics on and off is toggling the switch and making sure you put in the right report suite ID. So let's go back into that launch property. And now that I've added that extension, we're actually going to create a data element that's of a new type. So we have a new XDM data element type. So if I pull up this data element, the extension type is that SDK extension. And then right here, you'll see that this is a XDM object type, and that same view that we had when we're building the schema is reflected here to make it very easy for you to go in and either type in direct values. You can, of course, use data elements to dynamically populate certain parts of the schema. You can populate each single node, or if you have a data layer that matches the entire structure, you can map the entire object or a section of that node at once. So it's really up to you how you want to populate that XDM schema. So that's just setting up the data elements. And this is key because you'll still, all the work you've done in the past for creating data elements, that's not wasted. You'll leverage all those data points. You'll just map them into this XDM format before they get sent over here instead of in a rule action. So we'll go and take a look at, I'm going to discard those changes. We'll go and take a look at a rule action here. Let's pull up the global page top. And you'll notice that I don't have the analytics, send data to Adobe Analytics. I don't have the target rule actions. I don't have audience manager rule actions. I just have this one send event. And in the send event, we go through and we specify that XDM object that we just constructed in a data element. So you set up the schema, then you go in and you map data points to that schema in the XDM schema, and then you use this rule action component to send that schema over to the edge. And so now we can take a look at what that actually looks like in real time. And so this is our test website. And if I pull up, the lovely ghostery, and also I'll hit refresh here, it doesn't see that Analytics and Target and Audience Manager are running here. And that's because we're pushing data directly to the edge, and all of that data is being sent from the edge. So it's not running here on the client side. Now, we know that debugging and troubleshooting is a big part of implementation. So don't worry, we're not leaving you in a lurch here. We've got the Experience Platform Debugger. And let me refresh. Oh, where'd it go? I can see here that it does detect that the Web SDK is there and it's running inside of launch. And if I go look at the Web SDK, these are the different events or the different XDM object pushes that have been sent out. And you can actually click on that and see the entirety of that JSON structure that's sent. This is a compressed view. And then if you scroll down, you can see this, this nice parsed out view here where this is the different data points that are being sent over. And this matches to that schema format, the XDM schema that we created in the platform interface, that we populated over in the launch data elements, and then it's being sent through. And so this, AMC Evangelist, this is something custom that we did. It's not even a standard schema or a mix-in, just different data points that we're able to send through. And we can go and take a look. And this is an Adobe real-time report for the site. And you can see that the surfing around that I was doing, the data is flowing right into Adobe Analytics. And even better, we can actually open up, if you want to see it a little closer, let's refresh this. And it is a bidirectional flow using the XDM, using the Web SDK. So we can go and take a look at this call that's back. And you can see right here, this is the payload that comes back. So here's the visitor ID, the ECID service that's coming back. And there's also a personalization event. So I'm running Target on this site. And so right now we've got this, this lady here that is doing yoga. But let's say we want to go and check out the men's section of the store, and we're going to look at the pants. So now we've checked out the upcoming pants from Luma, and we go back to the site. Now I've got a personalized experience that's saying, okay, now we're going to try and, hone in on who the user is, and we're providing this experience via Target. So let's open up this again. Let's make sure that it runs. Hopefully there it goes. Let's look at that interact call. And now that the personalization payload has the actual information that Adobe Target Experience information code of what's actually being provided here on the screen. And so you can leverage this. This is just one example of how you can leverage and consolidate this. But now, if you think about, with all the different changes that are coming, that the browsers are forcing upon us, so many customers, every single customer I talk with is concerned about performance and page load and page speed. If you think about the implications this has, just removing all those different code libraries, removing all those redundancies, and making it so that it's an easy single push to Adobe and a single call of stuff back, it's much, much faster. If you reach out to your Adobe account team, I think we've got some performance data that we can pass along. I don't happen to have it handy here, but it is a significant improvement at every step, from the amount of code on the page, to the amount of network calls to the different solutions, to the amount of network calls that come back, and the speed in which stuff can be rendered. And so that's, that's the demo there of being able to put the SDK on there, toggle those switches in that edge configuration, and be able to have those Adobe tools activated and deactivated on your site. And again, I do want to say that even if you're not using Adobe Launch, which makes me sad inside, you're not left out in the cold. You will still actually log into Launch to set up your edge configuration, even if you use a different tag manager to deploy the code client side. So we want to make this work for all of our customers out there. But yeah, that's a quick overview of how to leverage that XDM schema and SDK to consolidate your Adobe data collection.
Well, thank you, Rudi. Yeah, I think that's helpful for the audience to see how, it's similar, right, to how you kind of implement today, but there's also some key differences with the XDM schema. So I hope that whole end-to-end process was very beneficial for the audience. So I know I've talked a lot about, the analytics side of the house. I'm going to turn it over to Andy now to talk about, focus on the other solutions that will, ingest XDM.
Yeah, so I mean, I work a lot with the personalization aspect of things and Audience Manager and Target, and I'm a little bit more curious around what that end of the coin looks like. It makes sense that, the XDM data gets sent to the edge and edge sends it to the individual solutions, but what kind of happens there? Obviously, analytics, and Jeff and I talked about this in our last webinar, that right now we're kind of using processing rules in analytics, but how does this data get mapped to what I'm familiar with in Target in terms of like mbox parameters and profile parameters? Can you talk a little bit about that end of things?
Sure. So, I mean, just like there's the mapping exercise for sensor up to analytics, there are very specific mix-ins that are already predefined for Target. So when you leverage those mix-ins, that the mapping of the inbox parameters and stuff are kind of preset for you. And so that's why it's beneficial. If you look in that list, there's a lot of those mix-ins that Adobe has already created for you. Now, there are some use cases that aren't quite covered yet that we're still adding more and more mix-ins. And so it's not 100% of the same use cases using the Web SDK today as you have with Target, but more and more of those are being checked off all the time as we either make enhancements to the SDK itself or we add in mix-ins that handle that mapping for you. So it was hard to see on that. I don't know, Jeff, if you can pull up that last slide with the triangle.
Yeah, sure.
So the direction of the data flow, we try and map it out by which we're doing. It's a one direction sending data to analytics, but Target and Audience Manager, through the Marketing Cloud and Advertising Cloud, it's bidirectional. You saw a little bit of that in the demo with the payload coming back in that interact call. But everything is, controlled either through the SDK or through those different mix-ins. One of the options I didn't spend a lot of time, I should have spent a little more time talking about it in the demo, is, do you want to handle the personalization events? And checking that box in the extension basically enables a lot of those features you were asking about how does it handle that mapping, that it activates those for you. It also does that pre-hiding script that we all know and love, that you have to have the pre-hiding so you don't get that flicker or screen flash. It's just a bummer of a user experience. So it handles all of that without having to go outside of launch to put that code in.
Got it. So it sounds like right now there's kind of a translation layer of like XDM to those familiar names I know and love inside of Target, like the mbox parameters and the profile parameters, and that's all done through different mix-ins and whatnot. And I'll be honest, I have not checked it lately, but is there a way to, so those are the two big ones, mbox and profile, and obviously those are very different in the way that they're handled. Profile parameters are persisted, whereas mbox parameters are not. Is there a way to specify that in the XDM as of now, or is that on the roadmap still?
I believe that use case is still on the roadmap. I will double, it wasn't, the last version I saw said it's still on the roadmap, but I will find an update before the recording goes out to make sure we can add that in the notes there.
Okay, cool. That's great. And what about Audience Manager? So Audience Manager, what I'm used to is, essentially the server-side forwarding of analytics context variables effectively. How is that different with XDM when we're trying to pass data to Audience Manager?
So there's a couple different ways. One way is it doesn't have to be different. If you've already got server-side forwarding set up from Audience Manager to Analytics and you don't want to disrupt that, you don't have to. So one of the things to think about is so much of leveraging the Web SDK is opt-in. And so you could, in theory, set it up that you're only using the Web SDK to send your analytics data over, and you leave Target and Audience Manager alone in the way you have them set up today. If you want to have Audience Manager continue to do that server-side forwarding, we do have several customers that are doing that. They didn't turn that part off at all. And so if you do have it, it is possible to have it, it is bidirectional, the Audience Manager. You could have that data come back, and then you'd have to, on the edge, send it over to Adobe Analytics. So it's still, technically, it's still happening server-side, but it's how you want to change those routings.
Yeah, it sounds like you built in some backward compatibility, so it's not just a hard cut over and you got to switch everything over to a new method all at once.
No, there's customers out there running H-code in the wild. Not very many of them. I've seen it. I'm not going to say their names on a live recording by any stretch of the imagination, but we're not turning off your ability to send data to Adobe the way you're doing it now, for any time foreseeable in the future.
Yep.
I imagine it'll be much like how everything else, with all the different enhancements, the moves from app measurement, the moves from, at.js to inbox.js, or maybe I flipped those around. But, there will be new development, new ways of tracking, new features inside the reporting tools that might only be accessible if you're using this type of data collection. And so it's going to be definitely heavy on the carrot side, very, very light on the stick. But we're not going to disrupt anybody's current implementation. If you don't want to go through this process to leverage it, that's fine. Our customers for years have been begging us for some sort of consolidated data collection for server-side forwarding to help them reduce the page weight on the site. And this is, we're very happy and pleased with what we've come to market with, but we're not going to force anybody to go down this route.
Real quick, you mentioned the mobile SDK earlier, and that's in beta. Can you share just a couple bullets about what might be different with that SDK as it relates to the one that we currently know and love?
Sure. So again, it's a lot more of the consolidation of the Adobe tracking code inside. It's leveraging, behind the scenes, it's leveraging the same library, which the efficiencies there. Again, it's removing the different redundancies between the different point solutions and setting it up so that it'll be much easier to maintain. The biggest piece that the clients have struggled with, and I touched on it very briefly, is just keeping the code, the different tracking libraries in some sort of version compatibility level, especially when you're trying to do visitor ID stitching or ECID stitching, that if you go to a new version of the visitor ID service, then you have to get app measurement up to a certain level, and you have to get target up. And it's like the old carnival sideshow of all the spinning plates, and you have to keep all the plates spinning at the exact same time or they come crumbling down. So we're trying to give you one plate, just one plate to spin instead of a dozen of them. Right now, the beta is doing really well on the mobile side. I expect it to look, just like now when you go in and configure a mobile launch property, the ability that you have to add extensions and stuff like that, that'll be a similar interface. Also, the ability to map to the XDM schema that you've created. The nice part is the schema doesn't care where the data is, what the source of the data is. If it's coming from a set-top device, if it's coming from a smartwatch, if it's coming from an Echo device, if it's coming from a mobile web, it doesn't matter. The beauty of the schema is it's just name value pairs. And sure, there'll be some flag that says this data originated on a web browser or a mobile app. But other than that, it's just data at that point. And you can set up the traffic cop, the edge network in the middle here to split that data however you want to, or munge it all together. It'll be completely up to you. But that's one of the really great benefits is it's not a different formatted call anymore. It's the exact same structure. And you'll have, using the likes of like Project Griffin and stuff like that, be able to see into those calls, just like I did in the Experience Cloud Debugger, where you were able to go and see those different XDM events. You'll be able to see that and see those calls for troubleshooting and debugging. And so what it opens up from that perspective is really cool.
Very cool. So how can we try to future-proof and prepare for what's next? You have just a couple tips for, like, should we start trying to format our data layer in XDM? Is there anything we can do to make our lives easier when we do want to move on to like the Web SDK, or potentially even get a license for AEP? So, and any tips out of the gate would be helpful.
Sure, and a lot of the tips are stuff that if you've ever talked to me about, like migrating from DTM to launch, a lot of them are the same. It's if you just doing some really good housekeeping in your implementation. So if I've been in customers' accounts where you see lots and lots of disabled rules and they say, yeah, we don't use those anymore. Well, get rid of them. Delete them out of the interface so they're not hanging around. I think about it like if I'm going to move houses. And if I've got a bunch of furniture and stuff I don't want, I'm going to get rid of it before I box it up and move it to the new house. So get rid of everything that you're not using. Sins of the past, legacy code, anything that you just, technical debt that's hanging around. There's no need to try and migrate that. I've always stressed the importance of naming things in a meaningful way, whether it's the rules or the data elements, so that when you're looking at the list of data elements, hopefully they're not listed as props and evars, because that doesn't mean anything to anybody. Hopefully they actually represent the data points you're trying to send. If you haven't done a great job with the naming strategy, go in and clean that up so that it's easier to do that mapping. And even if you wait long enough and the data mapper is there, it'll still make your life easier.
Yep.
And the other thing is go through and look at what kind of custom code you've written that might be trying to handle some of the workarounds that people have had to put in place for whether it's cookies or the visitor ID stuff, or just custom code they've written for analytics. There may be a fair amount of that that's able to be done on the server side now.
Sounds great. Cool, thanks.
All right, so I know we're at time, but I think we can go over a few minutes because there's definitely two things I want to talk about that are really exciting on Adobe's roadmap. I think that the first one, Rudi, is launch server side. You've kind of alluded to it earlier when you gave the demo, but will launch server side be as easy as you open up your launch property and there will be a server side configuration? I'm sure there'll have to be some setup with client care and your account rep, but can you kind of take me through what that would look like provisioning launch server side?
Sure. So so it will have to be set up with, like you said, with your Adobe account team. But I can give you a sneak peek of what that interface is actually going to look like. So there's actually a new property type called a server side property. Nice little different change in the icon here. But the rules and the other things will function very differently. And so again, this is all tied into that edge configuration. And so basically there's the environments. There aren't JavaScript libraries for the environments. I've just got, very unique environment IDs. And this is what actually gets plugged into the edge configuration. So it still has that same workflow that we know and love of being able to go send things to development and staging and production. So you'll be able to tie those environment IDs in your edge configuration to say, this is anything that I send to the edge. I'm going to use this server side property to do any kind of data manipulation and sending that data to other systems. We take a look at a data element. The data element types are very different. Right now, there's a path and custom code. And this path is, if you recall, when I opened up that Experience Platform Debugger and you looked at the XDM object, this right now, you just put in that dot notation that I'm actually grabbing the viewport height directly out of that XDM object. One of the things I anticipate being in here, and hopefully the product team doesn't, this is something hopefully they're working on too, is that same lovely tree view where you could expand the tree and say, I want this node, just to make that easier to grab the value out of. And then there's different extensions. And so we have the core extension. There are extensions for other vendors that are working, as well as we've got like a universal cloud connector, kind of a universal, it's effectively like Postman in the sky that can allow you to do get and puts and any other type of request to any third-party systems. So when you take a look at the rules, you know, there's no event type. The event type is the edge received an XDM data push. That was the event. So there's no events here. You can add conditions so that you can, again, you know, only trigger on certain things. But like this cloud connector, I was just testing it out with a simple webhook, but this could be any third-party vendor. You specify how you're pushing the data, and you can send dynamic data values, hard-coded data values, whatever you prefer. And you can also send other data out to other systems as well. But this all happens on the server side. So this is what it's going to look like. And so even if you're using a different tag manager, you'll still log into this interface to leverage launch server side. You still have that ability to have access to this type of infrastructure. I anticipate a lot of change here to happen before this comes out of beta, before it gets released, but this is just a little preview that it'll be just another property type. When you go to create a property, it'll be web, mobile, server side. And then it'll all be tied together in that edge configuration.
Gotcha. That's really cool. So if the way I'm thinking about this right now is, you know, if Adobe could handle the identity resolution and then you use your XDM for the metadata from the page, in theory, you could send this data out to, like, say, a media partner or marketing partner, right? And kind of take that third-party marketing tag away, essentially, if take the weight off your page, right? I mean, is that kind of the idea behind it?
Absolutely. As long as the system you're sending it to has the capability to receive data. You know, it could be an internal system. If your company has a data lake that can receive data at the volume and transactional speed that you need to send it. If it's a media partner, retargeting pixels, third-party pixels, doesn't matter. Other vendors, as long as they've got a mechanism to receive that data, then we can push it to them. And as you see, you know, launch has been an open system. We've had extensions for other vendors in there, other third-party partners. It'll continue to be that way through the server side. So it will be opened up for folks to be able to build out, whether it's custom extensions or just standard third-party extensions to make that data flow a little easier for them.
Gotcha. And then just to clarify, it sounds like using launch server side, there's going to be no cost implication for just launch server side, but the forwarding aspect out, right, there probably will be a cost because you're moving it from a non-Adobe destination.
Right, there will be cost implications. Anytime you send data outside of the Adobe system from the edge, there will be a cost. And I don't have any information on what that pricing looks like. That's something that the team is working hard on. I do expect it to be extremely competitive with the other solutions that try to do similar things in the market. But this is definitely a conversation to call your Adobe account team and have those pricing conversations. But yeah, sending data to Adobe using the edge, there's no cost implications, just some ramifications when you start pushing, we push that data out.
Okay, gotcha. All right, I think that's all my questions. I want to try to get a couple questions answered in the Q&A real fast. So the first one, any knowledge on Adobe I/O API? Not today. I think that's a very valid topic though, and we could probably host a webinar at a later date to talk more about the Adobe I/O API as that's growing. So unfortunately today, no. Brian has one. How does this translate to video and heartbeat? And I don't know. I've never tested XDM using, you know, the video player yet. Rudi is.
So I mean,
take on.
The heartbeat is just, you know, it's data pushes on an interval. I mean, if you break it down to what it's doing, it's every so often you're specifying how frequent you want those data pushes to go. So the short answer is it'll just be a different mechanism, you know, a different rule action that'll say, instead of sending it through just to Adobe Analytics, it'll be an XDM push that goes out if you want to use Heartbeat or the video things. But then once that data is on the edge, then you can send that data from that one call that you were just sending to Analytics to any other solution where it makes sense. So if you think about, because we've broken down the little walled garden of that was just Adobe Analytics call. Now it's a call to the edge. And what you determine what you're going to do with that data on the edge is totally up to you. You could just send it through like you've always done, or you could create a custom rule like I showed you in launch server side, where you might put some of that data out to a different vendor. So it opens up all sorts of possibilities.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I didn't even think about it that way. So that's good. All right, last question from JP. Did I understand this right about mobile? We could have one launch embed on the web property and the same launch embed on the native mobile app property with 2 extensions?
So not exactly. It would be a different embed configuration for the mobile, but you could have them push into the same report suites. You could have them put, you could have them, the endpoints being the same, but it would be a different configuration for the mobile, for native mobile. If it was just mobile web, sure, just one embed code. But you can certainly have all that data on the edge, pushing it all together, going to the exact same report suite.
Gotcha. And it could, in theory, it could share the same schema, right? Essentially.
It could.
Classic mixins, right?
Right. There may just be a flag in the schema that says this was from my app, or this is from my website, or which one of my websites was it for. You might have the same schema you use across all of your websites. You might have a different version depending on which ones you're doing. Now, you can also use different schemas for different calls. You might have 2 or 3 schemas that you actually leverage on a single site. So the schema is only unique by the type of call you're making. But you can work with multiple XDM schemas in a single property, but you're only pushing one schema call at a time.
Okay, that makes sense. I got you there. And I think the last one that was in the chat, are there any out of the box data connectors? I think we kind of answered that with the launch server side. I think there was 3 now. I'm sure there'll be more extensions.
Right, and that's even an older version of the beta that I had pulled up. So, and there are, from other types of data connectors, that's one of the advantages, that if you do want to look at platform, there are data connectors that platform can connect, where you can push that data, to different data sources, and also pull in other data to both enrich the profile. There's a whole bunch of other advantages. We could have multiple webinars just on what that can do for you. So, I don't know specifically what type of data connectors they were referencing, but yes.
Okay. So yeah, ever evolving, right? I mean, this is fairly new. So I think there'll be more as we kind of get more mature with it. So I think that's it. I think we went through a lot today. Rudi, I really appreciate it. Every time we talk, I learn so much. And thanks for the audience for joining. I hope you were able to learn something today. And I think, we could have probably 5 more webinars focused on the Web SDK. So thank you again, Rudi. I appreciate it. And Amy.
My pleasure.
All right, everyone, have a good rest of the day.